Hi everyone. I wanted to tie up a couple of loose ends with regards to my discussion with Inmendum, Gary, if you can call it that, video exchange back and forth, I guess. The one thing that I think has gotten lost, at least probably by Gary, and may not be clear to everyone, is that I'm not making the point that you can't moralize to people. That's not my point. In fact, I think you should moralize to people. I think you ought to get on your soapbox and tell them when they're doing something wrong. The point is, I don't think you can do that if you believe that everything is sort of biologically determined, that people are just the end result of mechanical processes. I don't think that makes any sense. All you can do at that point is just hope to try to reprogram them at some point. It would be just as inane as yelling at the computer for typing the wrong letter when you hit the keyboard. It's been programmed to do that. It's got a fault that can only be fixed by a new program, and it's pointless to moralize, or at least that's pointless in a worldview where your assertion is that they're just operating off a script. The interesting waffling that goes on with Gary is he's making the assertion that everyone's operating off a script, but they know the script is bullshit, and they're lazy, or it's convenient, or they'd rather do read off the bullshit script than to do the right thing. Which again, this waffling between determinism and free will. As a person who believes in objective morality and free will, I think you can and should moralize to people if they are doing things that are immoral. So I'm just never saying you're not allowed to or you shouldn't. I actually think you should. The point is, it's consistent with my worldview. I don't think it's consistent with Gary's. One thing I wanted to clarify as well, this whole topic of free will brought about some, I think, interesting discussions on the comments section of my video. And I would say, you know, Gary's objection to that would be free will. Free from what? Are you free from, you know, rationality, free from logic and physical properties? Can you free will yourself $1 million? I think it's best to call it just will. It's not free, or although you might say free from the biological imperatives. In other words, one of Gary's issues with with life is addiction. You know, he's got these few words that he likes to use when he describes the nature of our existence, and addiction is one of them. Well, that's where will, or free will, comes in. Free, again, from the biological imperatives, is to overcome addiction, is to make the difficult choice. That's really what will is about, is making the choice that is better. Making the choice that is optimal, but not necessarily that one that, as Gary would like to say, that's convenient, that's easy for you, that's just the one you'd rather make because you just want things your way in the moment. Making the harder choice. And that's why I think will, or free will, is really a key component in morality, in this idea of minimizing harm to other sentient life. It's really key that you recognize that you have will, free or otherwise. In his ramble, Gary mentioned something about that determinism is just a fact, and then he went on some crazy ramble talking about how we know this because fish evolved into creatures with penises or something, so that then they were dominant in sperm competition, right? Because they could get up inside there instead of having to just spray it around on the sand, on the gravel bar or whatever. I'm not sure what he meant by that, but I think he was trying to sort of say that, you know, that the whole deterministic process of life is just procreation for procreation's sake and nothing else, dominance. But I think the emergent properties of consciousness, while they may be governed by evolutionary processes, I think they push us to a different plane. And I don't think you can talk about biological processes in the same way that you can talk about processes, evolutionary even processes that are a result of consciousness. It's different because we can make different decisions that actually may not be evolutionarily beneficial. Gary would be a prime example. He's chosen to end his gene pool with him, right? The buck stops with him. Well, that's different. That's not deterministic in terms of the biological imperative, which is to procreate basically at all costs. So again, to me, this illustrates and illuminates more of a free will argument or a will argument than it does any kind of deterministic argument. I certainly don't see where Gary gets the idea that he can call determinism a fact. outside of his fish penis example. By the way, fish do still spawn, right? So, did they miss the memo? But we don't really have a control, right? Gary appears to be fairly science-minded, so I would have to ask, where is the control for you to apply the scientific method to gain, enough data to make a determination? There's no alternate me that's exactly the same in an alternate, exactly the same controlled universe to apply to study and to perform tests with and that sort of thing. Would I make the same decision 1,000 times in a row, or what would it take to spark a different decision, and does mood have any impact on that, and just all these different things, right? So I'm not sure where that comes from. One of the other things that I thought was interesting, that I think Gary makes a very important point on, is there's this discussion about having enough empathy for other sentient suffering and even compassion. And he sort of says, he decries the concept of compassion because it connotes bias, right? You have compassionate for cute and furry things that you like the looks of, but maybe not so much compassion for something that's a little uglier. But that has no bearing on the suffering of the sentience itself. And so I think that's important, although I think compassion is the driver. So I think, rather than shelve compassion entirely, I think it's better. I think the best thing would be compassion that recognizes its own bias. Because I think, again, compassion is a driver and empathy is just the recognition. He decries empathy too, and then he just says, you don't need empathy, you just need a recognition, that the fact that suffering is had by conscious brains. I have a conscious brain, I recognize the suffering, etc., etc. Well, that's what empathy is. So, you can use a different word. I mean, a lot of this actually gets caught up in word games. Gary doesn't like certain words, and so he doesn't want them used, or he's got just got an explanation that's, it's a synonymous with the word that's being used that he just doesn't like. And that's a problem with discourse anyway, right? I mean, I mentioned to somebody in a comment here recently, I've argued with people for quite a bit of time, before I realized that we actually agreed. We just, we're not using terms in the same way. And, that's why it's always important, of course, to clarify your terms when you're discussing something with somebody. So anyway, the last thing I wanted to say is sort of getting back to this efficacy issue with the antinatalist, Gary himself in particular, because, he's all about the ranty rant, but I'm just wondering, and he's defending his methodology. Like, I just do me, and this is who I am. You want me to be someone else? Well, no, I want you to be a better computer, to use your terminology, right? Again, if what you're doing isn't really working that well, if you're not gaining enough traction to ever accomplish anything real in a field that you believe so strongly in, does the computer not check its own work once in a while and say, hamster in a wheel? You can go back to Gary's videos that are 10 years old and much older, and he's just doing the same thing, just with a few fewer subs, and really not by that many fewer. He hasn't gained that many over time, is what I'm saying. But what I thought was interesting to note, and that's why the title of this video is going to be what it's going to be, is I watched through the comment section, and I had a few people commenting to me, and of course it gets barbed, right? I'll be honest, I don't normally get quite as barbed as I was on Gary's video, just because the barbs are coming. Okay, I think you have to defend yourself, and sometimes the best defense is a good offense, just to let someone know you're not going to let them walk all over you. But the barbs that were coming, and not just to me, but also to other people who were commenting on both my video and Gary's response video, were all about Pwnage. And I realize that the majority of Gary's subs probably are people who aren't, they'll talk the talk, but they're not really doing anything, aside from maybe not having kids themselves and maybe being vegan, something like that. They're not really doing much to try to really spread the concept of antinatalism to people and to really make the case for the suffering of sentient life, and that, the game of life is really, it's anything but a zero-sum game. It's mostly on the negative side. Most experience is the baseline is negative. They don't do that. What they've done is they've become attracted to someone like Gary because he's constantly ranting and he's constantly sticking it to people, and for whatever reason they like that. They enjoy that. They like seeing people get put in their place. They like to see people get pwned. So, you see comments like, oh, this guy made a huge mistake, right? And yeah, it gets really good after, I don't know, minute 42 or whatever. You know, this is the right? And even the one fellow who had commented on my video, had commented on their video, had actually made videos similar to mine years ago, and, you know, sort of poked the bear again. And Gary's acolytes were on there saying, hey, Gary shelved you, you know, years ago, move on with it or something. And so I can see this sort of Pwnage culture. I'm not saying cult, I'm using cult here in the sort of pejorative, you know, everyday use of the word, not literally, you know, asserting that Gary is running a cult. But this is a Pwnage cult, really. That's all that's being accomplished here. You're not changing any minds, as I said in my previous videos. Antinatalism is not going to take hold. And if it ever does, it's not going to be because of the lot of you. That's not just going to happen. So again, you know, the efficacy of the argument is kind of shit. Anyway, that's enough of that. You know, I'd prefer to move on to other topics, whatever, if I can get back into sort of a regular routine of making videos. I appreciate everyone who's, you know, suffered, whose sentience has suffered as a result of all of this. Again, the only reason I made the video to Gary, he seemed to be a little bit frustrated that I was talking about determinism. The only reason I made the video is because he made a video about determinism, and he was frustrated that people were responding nihilistically to some of the things that he said and that sort of thing. That's why I made the video. You know, I actually like watching Gary's videos, but I've sort of reached that point. And for whatever reason, I find him likable. I don't know why, really, but I've kind of had my fill. And I guess that's kind of what it's like. You know, a lot of people have suggested to Gary, because of his worldview, because of antinatalism, he had to take himself out of the game, you know, of life, right? And he's probably not going to do that, but he may have inadvertently caused a few other people to lose their will to live after watching a bunch of his videos. Thanks for watching.